Before we dive into Hades' story, we need to understand the world he was born into. Ancient Greece wasn't just one unified culture, it was a collection of city-states, each with their own traditions, but all sharing core myths that explained everything from why seasons change to why people die. The gods weren't distant, abstract beings. They were personalities with flaws, desires, and conflicts, and among all these divine beings, Hades occupied a unique position, necessary, powerful, but deliberately kept at arm's length. His story begins not in darkness, but with his birth into a family destined to rule the cosmos. Long before Zeus ruled Olympus, long before humans walked the earth, the world was governed by beings called Titans. These were the children of Gaia, the earth herself, and Uranus, the sky. The Titans were immense, primordial forces who ruled during what the Greeks called the Golden Age. Among them was Cronus, the youngest and most ambitious. With the help of his mother Gaia, Cronus overthrew his father Uranus using a sickle made of adamantine, the hardest substance in existence. This brutal act gave Cronus the throne, but it also planted the seeds of his eventual downfall. After seizing power, Cronus married his sister Rhea, as was common among the Titans. But his mother Gaia, who had helped him overthrow Uranus, now delivered a chilling prophecy. Just as Cronus had overthrown his father, so too would he be overthrown by one of his own children. This prophecy haunted Cronus every waking moment. Unlike his father, who had merely imprisoned his children, Cronus decided on a more drastic solution. He would not let any of his offspring grow strong enough to challenge him. He would swallow them whole at birth, keeping them alive but trapped within his own body, unable to grow, unable to threaten him. When Rhea gave birth to her first child, she felt both joy and terror. She named him Hades, a name that would later be associated with his realm, but originally may have meant the unseen one. The moment was brief. Before Rhea could even hold her newborn son properly, Cronus appeared, snatched the infant from her arms, and swallowed him whole. Hades found himself not dead, but trapped in an impossible darkness, conscious but imprisoned within his father's stomach. This would be his existence for years, joined eventually by 4 more siblings: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, and Poseidon. They existed in a strange limbo, neither alive nor dead, aging slowly in their prison. What was it like inside Cronus? The ancient texts don't provide many details, but we can imagine the horror. Hades and his siblings existed in a pocket dimension within their father's body, a dark, confined space where time moved differently. They were aware, perhaps even able to communicate with each other, but utterly powerless. Hades, as the firstborn of this generation, spent the longest time in this prison. While his father ruled the world above, Hades grew in darkness, his personality shaped by isolation and helplessness. This experience would later influence how he ruled his own realm, with absolute control, ensuring no one could ever trap or overpower him again. Eventually, Rhea could bear the suffering no longer. When she became pregnant for the 6th time, she devised a desperate plan with the help of Gaia. After giving birth to Zeus in a cave on the island of Crete, far from Cronus's palace, Rhea wrapped a large stone in swaddling clothes. When Cronus came to claim this child, Rhea handed him the bundle. The Titan king, so paranoid and rushed, didn't even look closely. He swallowed the stone in one gulp, believing he had consumed another potential threat. Meanwhile, Zeus was hidden away, raised by nymphs and fed on honey and the milk of the goat Amalthea, growing strong and free. Years later, Zeus returned as a young adult god, powerful and determined. With the help of the Oceanid Metis, he prepared a powerful emetic poison. Disguised as a cupbearer, Zeus served this potion to his father. The effect was immediate and violent. Cronus's body convulsed and he began to vomit. First came the stone, then one by one, Zeus's siblings emerged. fully grown gods, preserved somehow during their imprisonment. Poseidon came forth, then Hera, then Demeter and Hestia, and finally Hades, the eldest, who had spent the longest time in that dark prison. They stood before their father, no longer helpless infants but powerful Olympians, ready to reclaim their birthright. The moment of liberation was both joyous and terrible. The 6 Olympian siblings stood together for the first time, facing their father who had imprisoned them. There would be no reconciliation, no peaceful transition of power. Cronus immediately called upon his Titan siblings, Oceanus, Hyperion, Iapetus, Chaos, Crius, and others. These ancient beings were not about to surrender the cosmos to upstart children. Thus began the Titanomachy, a war that would reshape reality itself. The conflict would rage for 10 full years, shaking the foundations of heaven and earth. Hades, emerging from darkness into this cosmic war, found purpose in battle, a way to reclaim not just freedom, but dignity. Early in the war, Zeus made a crucial strategic decision. Deep in the darkest pit of Tartarus, imprisoned by Cronus, just as Uranus had imprisoned them before, were the Cyclopes, 3 enormous one-eyed beings who were master craftsmen beyond compare. Zeus descended into Tartarus, braving its horrors, and freed them. In gratitude, the Cyclopes forged 3 legendary weapons. For Zeus, the thunderbolt that could split mountains. For Poseidon, a trident that could command earthquakes and tsunamis. And for Hades, they forged something different, not a weapon of destruction, but one of stealth and strategy. The Helm of Darkness, a crown that rendered its wearer completely invisible and undetectable. While Zeus became known for his thunderous assaults, and Poseidon for his earth-shaking charges, Hades developed a different reputation on the battlefield. With the Helm of Darkness upon his head, he became a phantom warrior, unseen, unpredictable, and terrifying. Ancient texts describe how Titans would suddenly find their weapons destroyed, their commanders vanished, their supply lines severed, all without seeing their attacker. Hades moved through enemy camps like a whisper, gathering intelligence, sabotaging defenses, and striking at critical moments. He embodied the inevitability of death itself. You couldn't see it coming, couldn't fight what you couldn't perceive. And when it struck, there was no escape. As the war dragged on with neither side gaining decisive advantage, Zeus made another fateful decision. Even deeper than the Cyclopes in Tartarus were imprisoned the Hecatoncheires, 3 brothers named Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges, each with 100 arms and 50 heads. These were beings of pure destructive power, so terrifying that even the Titans had sealed them away. Zeus descended once more into the abyss and freed them, promising them honor and freedom if they fought for the Olympians. The Hecatoncheires agreed, and their entry into the war was catastrophic for the Titans. Each could hurl hundreds of boulders simultaneously, creating storms of projectiles that no army could withstand. The climactic battle of the Titanomachy took place on the plains of Thessaly, where heaven and earth seemed to collide. Zeus unleashed endless thunderbolts that scorched the ground and split the sky. Poseidon summoned earthquakes and tidal waves that reshaped coastlines. The Hecatoncheires created a siege of stone and fury, and through it all Hades moved unseen, eliminating key Titan commanders and sowing chaos in their ranks. The earth itself groaned under the weight of divine conflict. Mountains crumbled, rivers ran dry, and the very fabric of reality trembled. Finally, after 10 years of warfare, the Titans' lines broke. One by one they were subdued and bound in chains forged by the Cyclopes, unbreakable adamantine chains. Victory achieved, the question became what to do with the defeated Titans. Zeus decreed they would be imprisoned in Tartarus, that deepest abyss below even Hades' future realm. It wasn't just a prison, but a dimension of suffering, surrounded by bronze walls and gates. The Hecatoncheires, in gratitude for their freedom, agreed to serve as eternal guards, ensuring no Titan could ever escape. As the defeated Titans were marched down into the darkness, Hades watched with particular attention. He understood imprisonment better than any of his siblings. He had lived it, and he recognized that proper governance required not just power, but the ability to maintain boundaries, to keep things where they belonged. This lesson would define his future rule. With the Titans defeated and imprisoned, the 6 Olympian siblings faced a new challenge: how to govern the cosmos they had won. Zeus, as the youngest who had orchestrated their freedom and led them to victory, naturally assumed leadership. But Poseidon and Hades were also powerful gods who had contributed immensely to the victory. The cosmos was vast. It needed to be divided. But how do you divide infinity fairly? How do you prevent the resentment and rivalry that could spark another war? The ancient texts tell us they made a choice that seems strange to modern ears. They decided their fates through random chance. They would cast lots, trusting to fate itself to determine who ruled what. The lots were cast. Zeus drew the sky and the heavens. He would be king of the gods, ruler of the upper air where storms and weather dwell, the realm closest to divine power. Poseidon drew the seas. All oceans, rivers and waters would be his domain, the source of life and the highway of the world. And Hades drew the underworld, the vast realm beneath the earth where all mortal souls journey after death, the caverns and minerals and hidden places. Some myths suggest Hades drew the shortest lot, implying he got the worst realm. But this misunderstands ancient Greek thought. Each realm was essential, necessary, and powerful. Without death, life has no meaning. Without the underworld, the natural cycle cannot complete. Crucially, the division didn't give each god exclusive domain over everything. The earth itself, the surface world where mortals would eventually thrive, remained common to all 3 brothers. Mount Olympus, the home of the gods, was shared territory. This meant that while Hades ruled the underworld absolutely, he was still an Olympian with the right to attend councils and influence the world above. However, ancient texts make it clear that Hades rarely exercised this right. Unlike Zeus, who constantly meddled in mortal affairs, or Poseidon, who frequently visited his domain's surface waters, Hades remained in his realm. Not because he was banished, but because he understood something profound. A ruler must be present in his kingdom. Some later myths portray Hades as resentful of his lot, angry at being stuck in the gloomy underworld while his brothers got more glamorous domains. But this seems to be a later invention. The earliest sources suggest Hades accepted his role with dignity and perhaps even satisfaction. Consider what the underworld offered: absolute authority. In the sky, Zeus had to manage quarrelsome gods and compete with other sky deities from different pantheons. In the sea, Poseidon dealt with ancient oceanic spirits and primordial water beings who resisted his rule. But in the underworld, the Hades was supreme. No god challenged his authority there. Even Zeus, king of the gods, couldn't reverse Hades' decisions about the dead. For someone who had spent his youth utterly powerless, this absolute sovereignty must have been deeply appealing. The Greek underworld, Hades' domain, was not a single location, but a complex geography of regions, each serving different purposes. It began at the boundaries of the mortal world, where rivers marked the threshold, 5 rivers in total, each with symbolic meaning. The Styx, river of hatred and oaths; the Acheron, river of woe; the Lethe, river of forgetfulness whose waters erased mortal memories; the Phlegethon, river of fire; and the Cocytus, river of lamentation. These weren't mere metaphors, but actual geographical features in Greek thought, creating barriers that separated the living world from the realm of the dead. Crossing them meant leaving behind everything that defined mortal existence. At the banks of the Acheron waited Charon, the skeletal ferryman whose ancient boat transported souls across the river to the underworld proper. Charon was not under Hades' command, but rather a primordial entity who predated even the Olympians. Performing his duty since the beginning of death itself, he demanded payment, a coin called an obol, placed on the tongue or eyes of the deceased during burial. Those who couldn't pay were doomed to wander the shores for 100 years. This detail reveals something important about Greek culture. They understood death as having rules, procedures, and costs. Even in death, social obligations continued. Proper burial wasn't just about respect, it was a practical necessity for the soul's journey.